What if the greatest climate warning of our time is not coming from the Earth, but from the sun? What if the real danger is not runaway heat, but a deep solar silence powerful enough to change the climate again? And what if one scientist has spent years warning that the sun's role in climate has been dangerously underestimated? That scientist is Dr. Willie Soon. And tonight, we step into one of the most controversial scientific battles of our time. Because this is not just a debate about weather. It is not just a debate about climate. It is a battle over what drives the planet itself. And at the center of that battle stands Willie Soon. For years, Dr. Willie Soon has argued that the sun may play a much larger role in climate change than most mainstream institutions are willing to admit. While much of the scientific world focused on carbon dioxide, Soon kept returning to a different force: solar cycles, solar variability, Grand Solar Minima, the long rhythms of the star that makes life on Earth possible. And that one decision made him one of the most discussed, challenged, and controversial voices in the climate debate. But here's a question that keeps this story alive. Is Willie Soon chasing a truth that others ignored? Or has he pushed the solar argument far beyond what the evidence can support? To understand that, we have to start with the sun itself. The sun does not burn with exactly the same behavior all the time. It pulses through cycles. Roughly every 11 years, solar activity rises and falls. Sunspots appear, then fade. Magnetic activity strengthens, then weakens. But according to solar researchers, there are also much longer and deeper shifts. Long periods when the sun becomes unusually quiet. Fewer sunspots. Lower magnetic activity. A quieter star. That state is called a Grand Solar Minimum. And if that sounds harmless, history says think again. One of the most famous examples is the Maunder Minimum, a period from about 1645 to 1715 when sunspots nearly disappeared. It overlapped with some of the coldest decades of the Little Ice Age, a time remembered for brutal winters, frozen rivers, crop failures, and deep social stress in parts of the Northern Hemisphere. For Willie Soon, that period is not just history, it is a warning. Soon has spent years studying the relationship between solar activity and climate, and he has repeatedly pushed the argument that the sun's changes may have had a far bigger effect on Earth's climate than modern climate discussions often admit. In a 2015 paper co-authored by Soon and a large international team, researchers concluded that the Maunder Minimum was indeed a period of exceptionally low solar activity, rejecting claims that solar activity during that time was moderate or high astronomy and astrophysics. That matters because it confirms something important. The sun is capable of entering a deep, unusual, prolonged quiet phase. And once you accept that, a far more uncomfortable question appears. Could it happen again? And if it does, what happens to us? This is where Willie Soon's story becomes explosive. Soon has long argued that solar variability deserves much more weight in climate science. In a 2005 study, he argued that changes in solar irradiance could plausibly explain multi-decadal temperature variations in the Arctic Wiley Online Library. Later, in a 2015 Earth Science Reviews paper, Soon and his co-authors argued that Northern Hemisphere temperature trends showed a strong relationship with some reconstructions of solar activity, suggesting that the sun may have played a larger role than widely accepted estimates allowed science to abstract. Then came a more direct challenge. In a 2023 paper led by Willie Soon, the authors argued that unresolved uncertainty in land temperature records and uncertainty in historical solar datasets means the scientific community is still not in a position to say with complete confidence how much warming since 1850 is mostly human-caused, mostly natural, or some combination of both MDPI. That is a massive claim. Because if Soon is right, then one of the central narratives of modern climate science becomes less certain than most people believe. And if he is wrong, then one of the most powerful counterarguments in the climate debate begins to collapse. So ask yourself this. When you hear the word consensus, do you hear scientific strength or the possibility that difficult questions are being pushed aside too quickly? That tension is exactly why Willie Soon remains such a powerful figure. He does not just argue with data. He challenges confidence. He pushes on the weak points. He asks whether the sun, the largest energy source in our planetary system, has been reduced to a minor footnote too easily. And for many viewers, that question is impossible to ignore. because it feels almost unnatural to believe that the sun could be small in the climate story. But science is not about what feels intuitive. It is about what survives scrutiny. And that is where the backlash against Willie Soon begins. Mainstream climate science does not deny that the sun affects climate. In fact, it openly accepts that solar variability matters. The disagreement is about scale. How much does it matter compared to greenhouse gases in the modern era? According to the IPCC's 6th Assessment Report, solar forcing since 1750 is small compared with the forcing from greenhouse gases. The report's radiative forcing comparison places greenhouse gases at the center of recent warming, while solar influence remains far smaller. IPCC-AR6. NASA makes the same point in even simpler terms. Its climate communication states there is no impending mini-ice age from a future Grand Solar Minimum. NASA says that even if the sun entered a prolonged quiet phase, the cooling effect would only offset a few years of warming caused by present carbon dioxide growth, not reverse the broader warming trend. NASA science. That is the core of the conflict. Willie Soon says the sun may be much more important than commonly accepted. Mainstream institutions say the sun matters, but not enough to explain most recent warming, and not enough to bring on a new ice age. Those two positions are not close. They are worlds apart. And when you get to the question in this video's title, is an ice age coming? The divide becomes even sharper. Studies that model the future Grand Solar Minimum generally do not support the idea of a coming ice age. In 2010, Stefan Feulner and Stefan Rahmstorf examined the effect of a new Maunder-type minimum on future climate and concluded that it would likely reduce global temperatures by only about 0.1 degrees Celsius by 2100, with an upper uncertainty range of around 0.3 degrees. Far too small to cancel projected greenhouse warming. Wiley Online Library. Another 2015 study reached a similar conclusion. It found that a future decline in solar activity could influence the stratosphere and create stronger regional climate effects, especially in winter circulation patterns. But the global cooling remains small, not a frozen planet, not a civilizational ice collapse. A limited global effect with more noticeable regional atmospheric changes. PMC. That means something very important. The strongest mainstream response to Willie Soon is not, the sun does nothing. It is, the sun matters, but not nearly enough to support the dramatic conclusion. And that subtlety matters, because this is where many public debates go wrong. One side says solar influence is everything. The other side gets portrayed as if it says solar influence is nothing. But the actual scientific argument is more precise and more brutal than that. The mainstream position says yes, the sun influences climate. Yes, grand minima are real. Yes, the Maunder Minimum happened. Yes, solar changes can affect atmospheric circulation and regional climate patterns. But no, the evidence does not support the idea that an upcoming Grand Solar Minimum will trigger a new little ice age. That is a battlefield Willie Soon steps onto, not a battlefield of easy denial, a battlefield of contested magnitude. So why do so many scientists push back against Soon's work so strongly? One major reason is methodology. A detailed critique published by Real Climate in 2023 argued that some of Soon's recent claims depend on disputed solar reconstructions, unrepresentative temperature station choices, and statistical methods that critics say create misleading correlations rather than physically persuasive explanations. Real Climate. Critics also argue that if the sun were driving most recent warming, the atmospheric fingerprint would look different. One of the strongest mainstream arguments is that greenhouse warming tends to produce warming in the lower atmosphere, while the stratosphere cools. Scientists say that observed stratospheric cooling is more consistent with greenhouse gas forcing than with increased solar output, which is one reason they reject the idea that solar variability explains most recent warming. Real Climate. IPCC-AR6. And yet, Willie Soon still matters. Why? Because he keeps attacking uncertainty. He asks whether land temperature records contain biases. He asks whether urbanization has distorted long-term warming estimates. He asks whether historical solar reconstructions are more uncertain than the public realizes. He asks whether attribution studies are more assumption-heavy than they appear. And whether you agree with him or not, those questions have emotional force. Because uncertainty changes everything. Uncertainty weakens certainty. Uncertainty invites doubt. Uncertainty creates room for alternative explanations. And in public science debates, doubt is powerful. That is why Willie Soon remains such a compelling figure to his supporters. To them, he is not just a scientist. He is a man still asking the question others want closed. The man still pointing at the sun, while everyone else points at emissions. The man refusing to say the case is finished. But to his critics, he represents something else entirely. A pattern of selective arguments. A focus on controversial solar links that do not match the full body of modern evidence. A repeated challenge to mainstream attribution that generates attention, but fails to overturn the strongest physical and statistical conclusions of current climate science. And maybe that is what makes this story so impossible to look away from, because Willie Soon is not easily placed into a simple category. He is not ignored. He is not fully accepted. He is not outside the conversation. He is not inside the center of it either. He exists in that dangerous middle ground where a scientist becomes bigger than a paper, a symbol. To some, he symbolizes courage. To others, resistance to evidence. To others still, he symbolizes the uncomfortable truth that science is never as emotionally clean as the public wants it to be. So now we come back to the biggest question. Is an ice age coming? If you stay strictly with the strongest mainstream evidence, the answer is no. The current scientific literature, reviewed here, does not support the idea that a future grand solar minimum would create a new ice age. The expected global cooling effect appears too small, too temporary, and too weak against the scale of greenhouse forcing described by mainstream climate science, NASA Science, Wiley Online Library, PMC. But if you follow Willie Soon's line of argument, that still does not close the story. Because Soon's challenge is bigger than one headline question. His deeper argument is that the climate system may not be understood as confidently as we are told, that the sun's role may be larger, that data limitations matter more than many admit, that attribution may rest on assumptions the public rarely sees. And that is why his research continues to pull people in. Not because he has proven an ice age is coming, but because he keeps alive a question that many thought was already buried. What if the sun is not a side character? What if it is still a lead actor? Think about that for a moment. What if the biggest object in our solar system still holds more climate power than modern politics, media, and institutional messaging are comfortable admitting? Would we even recognize that possibility if it were true? Or would we dismiss it before the evidence was fully heard? That is the psychological power of Willie Soon's work. He challenges not just conclusions, he challenges intellectual comfort. And viewers feel that, because at the end of the day, this story is bigger than one scientist. It is about how science handles dissent, how institutions handle uncertainty, how the public decides who sounds credible when the evidence is complex and the stakes are global. And maybe that is why this debate refuses to die. The sun is still changing. Solar cycles are still unfolding. Predictions of long-term solar behavior remain difficult. Climate data are still interpreted through models, assumptions, corrections, and competing frameworks. So the real ending to this story is not simple. Dr. Willie Soon has unquestionably forced people to keep looking at solar variability, the Maunder Minimum, and the possibility that natural drivers deserve close attention. His work argues that solar influence may be larger than mainstream attribution studies allow, and that deep uncertainty remains in how the warming record is interpreted astronomy and astrophysics science direct abstract MDPI. But the broader scientific response is equally clear. Major institutions and multiple studies do not support the idea that a future grand solar minimum would send Earth into a new ice age. At most, they project modest global cooling and more noticeable regional effects, not a planetary freeze. NASA Science, Wiley Online Library, PMC. And maybe that is the real tension. Willie Soon may not have proven that an ice age is coming, but he has forced one question back into the light. Have we truly measured the sun's climate power correctly? And until the world stops asking that question, his name will remain in this fight. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think Dr. Willie Soon has been unfairly dismissed? Do you think the sun's role in climate has been underestimated? Or do you believe the evidence already shows that a grand solar minimum would change far less than many people hope or fear? Write your answer in the comments. If you want more serious documentaries focused only on Dr. Willie Soon, his research, his arguments, and the scientific reaction to his work, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Because the next chapter in this debate will not begin in a lab, in a newsroom, or on a political stage. It will begin with the sun.